So thank you everybody for joining us on our Monday Zoom and Learn. We do have a great topic that comes up quite often for you today. It's everything surrounding cannabis, how CARB views it, how it pertains to you as an agent or a broker in your business, resources, all those different questions that arise. I get asked at least once a week something pertaining to a cannabis question coming from a title side of the business. And a lot of it has to do with permits and is it available in certain areas, things like that. And I direct them to the appropriate areas to get those answers. But it comes up quite often. So we've been meaning to do this topic, and today is the day. So those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Tommy Dutcher. I'm the area sales manager in Riverside County for California Title Company. And the other half of the duo, Mary Jane Morris, and I put these on every single week. And we do record each of them. And those recordings are found on a YouTube page, which I'll put in the comments as well. So you can go back and see all our other topics that we've covered. Mary Jane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, I'm Mary Jane. I am the VP of Sales for Granite Escrow. I am a licensed broker and a 40-year practitioner of real estate. 20 of those years I was an escrow officer. I was specifically brought in during the pandemic with the idea that we could bring broker level solutions. If you're licensed, bonded, insured, fingerprinted, all that sort of stuff, you have the capability of giving correct answers. So that's why Granite brought me in. I'd like to also introduce Tracy Hasse from our San Diego office. And very briefly, I'd like to give her a shout out. Tracy is a new published author as of about a week ago. She wrote a book, Go Big and Go Home. Available on Amazon now. I started reading it this last weekend. It looks like a great book, Tracy. We're very proud of you.
Oh,
Wait, are you trying to say we have celebrity in our presence now?
Woohoo! Thank you. Well, I'm flattered. I'm totally blushing. I want to welcome all of my guests too that are here on this call, and grateful that you're all here joining us today. Thank you, Mary Jane and Tommy.
And then last but not least, John Ennis of our La Jolla office down in San Diego as well is
Hey, John.
Here as well.
Hi, everybody.
Oh, I'm sorry, John. I ran right over you. Welcome. All right, we're going to talk about cannabis. So I'm going to have to bring up my my PowerPoint. We've already had a good question from Michael. He's already being affected by a tenant who's using a personal grow situation without permission against their lease. So we've done a little talking about that. Michael, I'm gonna, after we hang up, I can call you and I can go over these sources that I'm going to recommend for you, and then get you ready to get yourself a new tenant. It sounds like.
Oh,
All right, and
it's history. It's history now. They've left. You know, I just didn't renew the lease, and he moved on.
Yes. We are going to touch on rental, but not as deeply as we're going to talk about sales, because rental is a constantly evolving situation given the coronavirus and all that sort of thing. We have seen successful just cause evictions, but they're going very slowly and very painfully, and usually require some expense. So I'm happy to hear that you don't have that tenant situation anymore. So.
All right. So as we get started as well, those that are already on the call, I did add 3 attachments to the chat. So if you click on chat, you'll see those 3 attachments. You can download them to your computer and view them. And then I would ask that if you do have questions, if it's a question that really pertains to everybody on the call and it's where we're at in the presentation, feel free to ask. And if it's not, put it in the chat and we will address all those questions at the end of the presentation as well.
We usually stay on after for a little bit, just chit-chatting and saying hello and answering things, but we'll also do private appointments if you guys want to talk about a personal situation regarding this after. So without further ado, I think we're ready. The
All
attachment
right.
I'm going to see in there is, Tommy taught me how to do this. This is the car marijuana for real estate agents that is available on your, it was one of the attachments we just added, as well as the quick guide for rental rules. Michael, this one had your answer in it, but there's a much lengthier version in the big one. And then another quick guide for residential resale transactions. So let's next slide for me. I want to talk about what our goals are for this meeting. We have 4 goals. Tommy and I talked about this. I don't know who else and what my age range is for this, but I often joke that I was a young, I was a elementary school person in the 60s, and I was a junior high in the 70s, and I was high school in the 80s. And so for us to pretend that we haven't had any exposure to the kinds of language, marijuana, and all the types of things we had. However, this has been a taboo subject. Like, you didn't bring it up. You didn't acknowledge it. You didn't talk about it. If you had a history, you were of any sort, no matter what you knew or how great you grew one plant, in your senior year of high school, you just didn't talk about it. So first thing we want to do is break that taboo. Cannabis is legal in California now. It is okay to talk about it. It is okay to sell real estate regarding cannabis. So the first thing we want to do is just make it okay for us to talk about it. And that goes for me as well. We want to learn where cars set the realtor boundaries. And like I said, there's a nice, like 40-page car lengthy discussion of every angle of this. But I'm going to be hitting the high spots today, but the attachments are already there for you guys to look at. We want to talk about what to expect when discussing property sales to grow pot. Tommy, I'm hoping that you will kick in on that. I don't have as much. I don't have as much. We've talked quite a bit about the real estate portion of it, but I haven't very often had to send someone off to the proper licensing bureaus and that sort of thing. So, and then finally, what are our available resources that are already out there for you that you can access easily? Besides Tommy, myself, Tracy, and Jonna. So we're going to back up just to a little history. Prop 64 passed in November of 2016. It was effective November 9th. It had a 57% approval rate. I went ahead and put the stats here on who in color, who wanted it and who didn't, which parts of the counties wanted it and which part of the counties didn't, and what level of support it had in those areas. Some of that is somewhat predictable. If you're familiar with Northern Cal growing situations. Next slide, Tommy. So what kind of recreational use is permitted these days? California law prohibits no outdoor publicly visible growing. You can't grow it in your front yard. Okay. No smoking within 1,000 feet of a school, a daycare center, a youth center, and if children are present, which when I took the car class directly with the car attorneys, they said it sometimes becomes an issue. If your rental is close enough to be within 1,000 feet, you've got a situation, or your home, the home you own is within 1,000 feet, you have some situation there. However, there are spring breaks and long breaks like we just had with COVID. And so CAR makes it very clear that 1,000-foot issue could be challenging one way or the other. If you're within 1,000 feet of a school or a daycare or youth center. No smoking in public in general. If smoking is permitted, it is prohibited. You can't, there's no exception for pot smoke. And no smoking while driving, which seems like an obvious one, but it goes right along with drinking and driving these days. It is impaired driving. And so the law did not allow you to vape in your car or smoke like you would a cigarette. And then how much can an individual grow these days? They can have 6 plants at home, indoors, or in an outdoor garden, as long as it's not visible by any normally unaided vision from a public space. You can only leave your home with an ounce or less, but you are permitted to keep all that you are able to grow. So if you grow more than an ounce, you are authorized to possess it. You're not allowed to travel with more than an ounce at a time. Here's one for Michael. Regardless of private rights to personal cultivations, landlords can still prohibit growing cannabis for any purpose as part of their leasing arrangements. So you might want to add that to your leases going forward. So we'll talk about that. So next slide. Can people use cannabis in public? No, they cannot. Only on private property, not in parks or on sidewalks or anywhere where smoking is banned. The fine increased to $250 for non-smoking areas and $500 for possession over. However, they are expecting to have, and there probably are already, places that are clubs like hookah clubs. I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly, and I'm sure I'm misusing hookah as well. But a type of smoking den, like a cigar den or a hookah den, and those kinds of places, they may eventually license those types of places. Similar to like a bar, or also events where they have specifically, I have been hearing about cannabis events, outdoor events.
So let's touch on that one. There has been in the past concerts where they've been able to get permits to allow it within the concert grounds. There has been situations where they experienced it in Colorado more so than California, because California put out certain laws in regards to their permits as well as licensing. But they ran into issues of fine print areas in Colorado when it became legal with private member clubs. So as you were talking, like cigar lounges and things like that, very similar to that, where you bring in your own supplies, but only members have access to the premise. And then that wasn't considered public, it was considered private. And so there was a lot of gray areas that I think the state learned from as different states became legal. So, you know, there are some still gray areas out there. I haven't necessarily come across too many that are taking advantage of the gray area, so to speak, right? For the most part, most city ordinances and stuff issued a certain amount of licenses to be able to sell or consume on premise, and then they also only limit themselves to permits, if any, based on city. So I think that's it on that one.
I believe strongly that licensing is going to drive out the small drug dealer, frankly, and that marijuana is not an opportunity for a coke den to go in next door or be part of it as well. So this is limited to the marijuana specifically. So let's go on to the next slide. I think I covered this one. Sorry, one more.
One more.
So can landlords, Michael, restrict, provides that personal rights to possess, process, purchase, obtain, and cultivate do not affect the ability of an individual or landlord to restrict cannabis on the individual or entity's privately owned property. Moreover, the right of a tenant for personal agriculture under civil code, as you see there, specifically exclude cannabis. Finally, nothing in Prop 64 permits someone to smoke cannabis where smoking tobacco is prohibited. So if you're a non-smoking property, that goes for marijuana as well.
To be very vague on that, non-smoking, not non-tobacco smoking, right? You just want to be
mean one thing, but now it means several things.
correct. You know, and you run into situations. So I know a landlord that ran into a situation where nothing was put into the lease prohibiting it, and then it became legal, and then they became to grow what is legal in their own home, and the landlord did not like it and tried to rewrite the lease to force them to stop. And then they took legal action, which ended up being a discrimination case. So, you know, you're walking multiple platforms when you try and stop something that's already happened legally, right? And so the safe bet is to know how to write it into a lease and understanding legally what you can and cannot write into your lease, right? So that you don't put yourself in that situation.
Non-smoking is a pretty popular lease item these days. You may just have to, you may be more comfortable spelling it out in more, more thorough manner. We're going to move on to how it affects real estate sales. And one more slide. So the sale of you may sell property where cannabis is cultivated, used, or sold. You positively can, and I have already had many clients. We've had an entire grow house burned down, and there were bags of materials still around the outside perimeters of the property and in closets and things. Obviously, some kids had raided it before the realtors got there, but we did have a house completely burned down that we had to work on. We had many where there's a full growing facility, where there's a warehouse and the lights are on and they are a licensed facility. We just finished one where we had the seller remove it all, move it to his new property so that we could sell the property as vacant, but you still, but it is still a material fact that needs to be disclosed to your buyer that the property has currently growing or being stored on the property. It's a material fact. One of the languages that I want to get you guys to get used to hearing, and I use it a lot on purpose because it's what CAR uses, and that's what they call value and desirability. Anything that would affect value and desirability. If you've been in the business at all, that is a big, big subject. What one person values and what another person finds desirable and vice versa is completely different from person to person. The law asks that you as a reasonable person decide whether a material fact is something somebody should know. And we all know the rule that when in doubt, disclose. So yes, it is something that you have to disclose if the property has had been a grow house. Can we back up one? I think my PowerPoint presentations. Uses in possession is still illegal under federal law. They're still trying to work out the banking issues because I don't know how many of you follow these issues, but marijuana growers often have a large cash situation going on in their hand. They pay their employees by hand, they pay their supplies in cash. These properties are targets for theft and vandalism, obviously. But for your purposes, federal resources are being targeted toward business and large scale operations. All right. Thank you. Then I covered this one. Thank you. One more. So we talked about value and desirability. Hey, there's a slide. I should meant to put my thoughts there. Okay. What about cannabis? So do you have to put it on the MLS if the property has had marijuana growing on it or been and you do not at this time per CAR? However, they do note that a local MLS could require it, and then you would need to do it for your MLSs. I would imagine the further north you go, that might be a little more likely than down here, and maybe as the pot laws, what, about 5 years or so old, so it won't, as it gets bigger, perhaps we will start seeing more of that on the MLS. Again, it should only be in the agent remarks. It should not be in the comments. One of the things I wanted to talk about here is as a managing broker, several times a year, I would get a call from an upset neighbor who had determined that this property used to be something that grew tomatoes or whatever. And the agent would write something like "great for growing." In fact, that was the specific complaint we got. The first line of the MLS said "great for growing." The neighborhood wrote to us and said, "We believe that you are marketing this to marijuana growers and we don't want them out here and we want that taken down." While we disagreed with that because it had not been a cannabis factory, it had grown tomatoes and flowers or something, we did ask that the agent alter that sentence somewhat to perhaps mention what had previously grown there and not just these people who feel strongly that they don't want it in the neighborhood do not stop. I've dealt with them 3, 4, 5 times in a row. That I've had them, one in particular took the signs down. Every time the sign went up, they would take the sign down. They, because it was a vacant property, they attached their own lock and caused us to have to get somebody out there to cut it. So you should be aware that the neighbors are watching. Frankly, they are trying to decide, and many of them are of a certain age, like I said at the beginning, where this was a taboo. This is not a medical situation in their mind. This is just an opportunity for all the things, all the negative things that we all fear with drugs is going to bring into their neighborhood. And in the rural areas, you should expect to hear from.
So let's talk about that real quick, because I hear stories on a weekly basis, right? So one comes to mind that I heard about a year ago where an agent was putting up her sign writer in the front yard after the house went listed. And a neighbor comes running from 2 doors down across the street, excuse me, you know, kind of crazy old lady type of neighbor, right? Comes in and says, you should know that this house was growing marijuana, selling marijuana, blah, 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 you know, just kind of spilled the guts of what she felt was happening in this house. And there was no, the sellers that were selling the house did not mention anything, and nor did anybody else. And that agent did not disclose what she knew from the neighbor. It came back to haunt her. The sellers did not disclose that they were selling, that they were dealing. And then what happened was the house closed, and multiple occasions somebody showed up, knocked on the door to buy marijuana. This was before it was legal. And that's how it kind of came to fruition. Well, the agent was warned by the crazy neighbor that it was happening. She didn't disclose it because she thought the neighbor was crazy. And the sellers never disclosed anything as well in the disclosures. So, you know, when you hear something as an agent, you have to use your best judgment of what's right and wrong. And when you're told something, that's usually grounds for disclosing it, regardless of who it came from, to protect yourself. Would you not agree with that, MJ?
Yes. There was a law upgrade recently, last year, I think, that said a neighbor's opinion about what's going on in the property or what they think went on the property, this is called cracked slabs, flooding they thought they saw one time, all this sort of stuff is not a material fact any longer unless they are able to produce something in writing. But to discount a neighbor who's going to be on your porch, you know, pretty often is also a difficult thing that you need to get around. So they did change the law to limit neighbor deciding that something is going on in the property and forcing a disclosure. However, it should not be completely swept under the rug either. Now, you are in real estate, you are very likely to go ahead and walk into certain properties that are full, legal, operational cannabis growing facilities. And as long as they're licensed and if they're selling the building, as long as the marijuana is not part of the real estate transaction, because those are completely separate licensing situations. So this is where one of the things I wanted Tommy to talk to us a little bit about. The marijuana, as long as it's clear in the contract that the marijuana and the marijuana growing facility is going to be removed, then it is a traditional real estate sale. You just are going to have to mention. But there is a potential now to walk in on a full legal growing facility and not be selling the marijuana. And the part that we most wanted to talk to you guys about today is that licensing and all that is an expanding situation. It is very limited. City, county, state, all have an opinion on it before we even get to the federal. Temecula, I think, shut it down within 30 days of Temecula City, Temecula, within 30 days of the law coming out. I remember very clearly reading the post and all. Tommy, do you want to discuss your concerns there?
Yeah, I mean, let's start right where you left off there is, you know, can you sell a building that, you know, was a grow house at one point legally? Yes, you can. There are a lot of title companies that won't touch anything related to cannabis. My title company, we will, and we do have underwriters that will underwrite businesses, residential, et cetera, as long as it's legal. Obviously, it does not encompass the business of cannabis. It encompasses the property in which it may be used for. So if you have a client that's looking for, you know, a warehouse that they're going to grow in and they have the licensing to do so and they've gotten the permits from the county and the city signed off, yeah, we'll underwrite and give title insurance on the building. That's before the business. And, you know, we'll also close on a sale of one as long as the property is being sold as real property and the business is completely separate and not transferring with it. So there are rules and regulations, like MJ said, that start from county, city, local ordinances and everything else that go along with it before you even get to the federal piece. And, you know, I get calls from agents weekly in regards to, I have a client looking for X type of property for a cannabis growing opportunity or dispensary opportunity, et cetera. First and foremost, that's not where you start, right? The client needs to start with where do you want it, and then finding out if they can even, one, obtain the licensing. If they already have the licensing, can they obtain the permits? Because you have Riverside County licensing, you have San Diego County licensing, and then you have individual city permits, right? And there are some cities, like for instance, Temecula, say, nope, not happening in our ordinance. So people are moving to the outskirts of Awonga and stuff like that. Well, they did issue some permits. They're not issuing anymore. So they will only issue so many and then they will stop, right? Or if they encounter that it is causing problems after the math, the city or the county may decide in particular areas to halt offering permits. So please make sure you're doing your homework with local government and local cities, et cetera, to make sure that it's even possible in the area in which your client's looking. Otherwise, you're doing a lot of work for absolutely nothing, right? So start there. Once you've gotten through that process, then start looking for the right property within the limits of what that permit may be used for, right? And I think that's the biggest thing, because most agents that call me with, hey, I'm looking for X or Y, they haven't done that yet, nor do they know if the client has done that. And so, you know, I would hate to see anybody put in even an hour of work. That is an hour you'll never get back, right? So you want to do your homework and make sure all that is done first before you even start looking for properties in an area, first and foremost, okay? as far as, like I said, once you get past that hurdle, which is a big one right now in Southern California, especially, once you get past that hurdle and you find a city or an area that will allow what your client's looking for, and your client has the appropriate, licensing, or if not needing licensing, is able to obtain a permit after the fact, I have no problem helping you with the title on that property. Most title companies right now are not touching anything pertaining to cannabis. And we can definitely help you still. Okay.
Two thoughts I had in San Diego, when this passed, San Diego laid out a portion of a zip code in the East County, and there were realtors that were going out and buying the properties, who spent whole days buying the property, because these properties, if this becomes a grow facility, is going to be worth millions of dollars. And so I had a bunch of realtors get out. Two that I can think out right off the top of my head worked the entire. She kept sending us deals that were outrageous for the price, and she was like, "We're buying everything at whatever price right now because it is in the grow zone." So lots of people saw it as an investment opportunity. I also want to talk to you about, down the road, I can't help but thinking that, although Granite Escrow isn't doing these either at this time, we've transferred crops of every sort, avocados, corn, olives. Eventually it'll be just a crop that we transfer the water bills and the electric bills, and we do all the usual business type of things that happen. Who's going to harvest, who's getting benefit of this crop, that sort of thing. So eventually it'll be a crop like any others. It's just, we're not there.
Yeah, it's going to take some time. I mean, unfortunately, is we're especially in California, our resources are not being used the way that they necessarily should, especially in regards to this topic. So I think over time we'll learn, and over time things will probably loosen up a bit to be able to do that. And I think, that's where you're coming from, is there are people out there that, look at those grow zones and say, these are going to be the areas in which things eventually will be allowed, and they want to buy up that land. And why? Because it's going to be worth top dollar when somebody needs the extra space, and that space on a business perspective makes sense to buy at whatever cost and whatever price.
This time, as part of the law, are required to grow 80% of the amount that they sell, because they didn't want a steady stream of Mexican marijuana or Northern Cal marijuana coming across state lines and across borders. So they are requiring them to. That's part of the reason when there are pharmacies, they're also growing as well. Can I get the slide? So it does not need to be disclosed on the MLS. And next slide. If you are going to show a property with cannabis growing on it, they're saying you should, if you're the listing agent, it should be by appointment only. Same for the buyers, for two reasons. A buyer may not want to visit a property where marijuana has been previously grown. They don't. There are certain cultures that won't look at a house where someone has died. There are good reasons why a person would not want to visit a property, no matter how right it was for them, if they were not comfortable with marijuana. So it should be by appointment only. Next one.
You there? Yeah,
Yep.
I'm on the next one. So it says, is cannabis being grown or stored on the property? Will it be removed by the close? Are there any special issues or
That you
concerns?
have documented that it will, and that, that's obviously going to be a walkthrough item or request for repair item, that all of it is completely gone and cleaned up, and that it does not transfer with the property. One of the one of the transactions I saw, they did buy some lighting, that sort of stuff, on a bill of sale, like we do tractors and things like that, but it should be removed completely, and it should be inspected before walk through that it's gone.
Yeah, especially like electrical, water, things like that. You'll see like, houses that even that weren't just a full grow house, right? Where they've converted every inch of the house into a grow facility. Even if they only converted a garage or a bedroom or a closet, in most cases, you'll find that they ran electrical there. They more than likely ran water there. And in some cases, they may have went and tied in the walls and things like that. You'll definitely want to make sure that you get a good inspector out there that is willing to, dig deep to find out how they did it and what needs to be done to put it back to normal.
We had a transaction after it closed that there was the client let us know that his one bedroom he had converted to a grow room on his own property had leaked while he was gone to work, and 300 gallons of water escaped while the time he was gone. So it could be some real water damage. Yeah. Next slide. Yes, it is a material fact. Generally, yes, the fact that the property has, whether or not it's been removed, if it was previously a grow house, we're going to talk about how to say what needs to be said and not overstate what you personally feel about marijuana, what you personally feel about the type of person who lived there or the type of person who might consider buying it. But it is a material fact and would potentially damage value or desirability. Next slide. While a client is very likely going to say this to you, don't worry about the licensing, just help me find the land and I will do everything legal. Okay, that whether or not the client says they should act that they would act lawfully, you are now treading in hot water. Okay? You are participating in what may turn out to be an illegal act, and if it was of the right size, could even draw federal attention. So while you would probably have a good excuse and be able to excuse yourself out of the transaction by whatever method, even the client saying that they asked you to stand down on that matter, you're going to spend some time and money avoiding prosecution or having an attorney involved. So you do not, as Tommy said, want to get involved in the licensing. No. It's meant purely the real estate of what they need to do what they're going to do under the parameters that the license gives them. The license says how many square feet, it says what they're licensed to do and how much they're allowed to possess.
So MJ, if a client contacts an agent and says, I'm looking for X amount of acres with X type of property on it, et cetera, in this area, and it has to have this and it has to have that, and then they slip in there that they want to be able to grow marijuana on it, right? And the agent asks about licensing and permits and everything else, and they say, oh, don't worry about that, I'll take care of that, you just find me the property. From a broker perspective, what type of advice would you give that agent? Would you give them, hey, you need to kind of back away from this until they do it? Or would you give them, fine, find them the property they're looking for, but you need to have documentation that specifically shows that, you are not aware whether or not this property can or cannot be used, for the production of a grow of marijuana.
And you're going to make that disclosure whether or not they're licensed. Okay, because we don't know whether they're meeting all the requirements of the licenses, city, county, state, that sort of thing. So you're going to give that. You have no idea whether that they have the capability of doing it, even if they're holding the license. Mm-hmm. Okay? This is completely separate and on them. I wanted to mention too that as a broker, the first words out of my mouth when somebody tells me that the house has been or will be or has previously had one room, you definitely need an electrician and you definitely need a plumber to come take a look, because these homes have almost always been adjusted. We have found them running on car batteries at times. We found one where the wire went over the fence to the neighbor, and they had tapped into the neighbor's area. There's also going to most likely be an odor issue of some sort as well. And our TDS and SPQ do now ask if there's an odor or have you been smoking on the property, and both of those should be answered correctly. Remember that when we disclose, no matter how bad that disclosure is, you are exempting yourself from further trouble on that matter. When you try to hide something or keep it down or think it's not or think it's not something that needs to be shared, that's when it's going to be a problem. And I can't help but take us all the way back to our licensing test. One of the questions we all had on our very first licensing test was, if someone asked you to do something that you're not comfortable with or that is illegal, no matter how much money they're offering you to do it, you have to turn it down. You can't take a listing where they've asked you to do something, where they've told you things that they want kept hidden. You literally have to say no. Now, does that mean that the next jackass is going to come right behind you and take the listing anyway? Yes, that does. It does sometimes mean that. But just like when somebody asks you to do something illegal on any other type of transaction, you're going to have to excuse yourself from it. Next slide. So this is what CAR wants me to leave you with. You want to disclose any red flags and indicated property is or will be used for cannabis purposes. The neighbor has said that, but they have no proof of it. Occasionally there's a newspaper article or somebody has some sort of police report or something. So you're going to disclose without giving an opinion on the legality or the illegality of the marijuana grow facility or a personal grow facility that they got there. You have your TDS, you have your SPQ, and you have your AVID to make these disclosures. There's plenty of places for you to say that it appears, or we are aware, or the neighbor said that there was a constant odor of marijuana coming from this house. So they're asking you to remember the DAD rule. Disclose, attribute to where you think that information is coming from, and then disclaim the ability to know or that they'll need to do some research. Now, remember the law of the Supreme Court found that buyer's agents have more responsibility than listing agents to run these things down. So if you're on the buyer side of the transaction and you think because the seller didn't disclose it that you're excused from general disclosure, general due diligence, you're not. And specifically if it comes up. So this was a very important case, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the team that was on it was a team I worked with in San Diego. So I know how careful they were, and they had money and they took it all the way to the top, and buyer's agents are more responsible than listing agents for running down information that may be needed. Now, I think this is not that different than trying, the other comment that I get a lot is people want to make wedding facilities in Temecula. There's crowds, there's HOAs, there's licensing, there's lot size requirements.
There's permits, there's parking issues, there's.
What's that, Tommy?
I said there's also permits, there's parking issues, there's a lot of things that go with all of that.
So this is what CAR asks you to remember when it comes to marijuana: disclose, attribute, display. Okay. Next slide. This is where you can get additional information. I did post all three of the things that CAR has available now currently on their website. Tommy posted them on the chat for us. If you need them after, we're happy to send it to you as well. Inside the The large package, the one the marijuana issues for realtors, is all the licensing agencies that are available. There's at least 10 pages of tenant issues in here, at least 10 pages of issues. The law defines marijuana as 20 or 22 products. At this time, all the products are listed in there, the various licensing bureaus, mostly at the state level. And so you would be obviously either working forwards or backwards from the state to the city or the city to the state, but you're going to be dealing with all those as well. So they are in that there. Next one. You're all welcome to a copy of this PowerPoint as well, if it helps you, when you're talking to your clients. You're welcome to have a copy of this as well. And then I think that takes us to questions. Tommy.
All right, let's go ahead and open it up. I did not see any questions in the chat. I will reiterate, there are 3 handouts as attachments in the chat. If you came on late, you probably will not see those. So I will add them to the chat again here in a minute. However, I will allow you, I think everybody's open to unmute themselves. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, and we'll be more than happy to try and answer them or get you the answers. If you're having trouble unmuting yourself, raise your hand, say aye. I'll try and unmute you myself. Wow, I've never gone through a cannabis class where there weren't any questions.
Well, I think it's pretty cut.
Can I make a comment, I guess? Let's see how to phrase this. In the course, I have a client who's not in that space, but is actually looking for agricultural land and greenhouse space.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a fair number of unused greenhouses out there, both from the flower industry and from, cannabis operators who failed. How should I, judge or caution the clients in terms of how much disclosure they should ask for, if there's a suspicion that it was in fact used in the industry previously?
I understand that as you'd like to know if you should report to your client this facility may have previously been a marijuana growing facility. You were breaking up a little, so I want to make sure I have the question. Do I have that correct?
MJ, I think it's your computer because you're breaking up right now.
Why don't you take the question, Tommy?
Okay, so I'll answer that from the perspective of, I think any broker out there would probably tell you that you cannot disclose enough, right? So if you're questioning what you should disclose, that means you should disclose it. And you should disclose it to a point that protects you on all sides as an agent, so that nobody can come back after the fact and hit you from any one angle. Okay, so if somebody says something to you, if you suspect something, I would say dig a little deeper and do your research to get to a point where you feel comfortable enough whether or not you need to disclose or you don't. And then if you're not a broker, brush that by your broker as well for their perspective.
And physical inspections will often turn up a few things that will lead you where you think you're going anyway. If you suspect it, and that you're probably going to find an electrical change or a plumbing change of some sort as well, that's going to lead you to that conclusion. anyway. So as a buyer's agent, you just want to be sure and create something that says that you, just like it said, disclose, attribute where you may or may not have had this information, and then disclaim it in writing that you've told as much as you possibly could about this property when the time comes. I'm sorry that I was breaking up and I couldn't hear your question completely. I see your number, Alistair. Shall I call you after? Would you like a call after?
Yes, please. Yeah. The corollary to that is there anything in the law that says if the property has been, shall we say, laying fallow for X period of time and not used for that purpose? Is there anything in the law that says, you know, after 5 years, you don't have to worry about it, or?
No, we do not have a time limit on this at this. I think, I hate to age myself, but I think as the younger generation comes up, there will be less concern. People be more comfortable with the subject in general. It was part of the reason we wanted to address it. It's just right now, it's still a touchy, subject for some people. So, but I'm going to give you a call after and make sure that your questions are answered more thoroughly and I can hear them carefully.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
I do have a quick one, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
So for someone that, for example, I represented an owner who was going to do a lease purchase and the tenants moved in and they brought their crop with them. And the home started to take on a scent that lingered. Does the landlord have the right to charge them for painting to cover up that scent?
Yes, and they may have ongoing issues with the neighbors as well, because when the wind blows, that's the most common time of complaint gets made is by neighbors who are sick of the smell. In fact, many of the homes that have been taken over entirely and are being used for illegal grow facilities, the number one way that they're caught is by odor. So yes, I would imagine that that is not what you would consider normal wear and tear, and that would qualify you for
Damages.
damages. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow. So
Any other
informative.
questions? All right. MJ, do we have an update in regards to upcoming classes?
I think we're going to readdress requests for repairs. It's been about a year since we've, last summer, because since we did requests for repairs, I think we're going to talk about that again. I am still seeing sellers being run over by inspections where the request for repair says, please prove to me this, that, and the other. The seller has no obligation to prove anything negative about his property. And so we're going to go over requests for repairs again, I think, next week. We're going to talk about a real as-is sale and what that looks like, and how to create that, and specifically how to answer a request for repair that was poorly written, frankly, because we see so many of them. I don't know, but we'll get into that next week. But I think request for repairs.
So those of you that have joined us today, pretty much every Monday at 12:30, we do a Zoom and Learn. It's a different topic every week, and it is the same Zoom login each week. So how you logged on today, you would be able to log on next Monday. So we'd ask for you to join us. Also, I did repost the 3 files in the chat. So if you joined us late, those are in the chat now. You can get those in the chat. I also put a link in the chat to a YouTube page that all of these Zoom and Learns that we do are recorded. So I think we have over 40 now, or pretty close to it, of different topics. So if you want to kind of go through and see different topics that we've done and maybe watch a few of them, by all means, you can do so there.
Very briefly, I want to remind everybody that if you have a transaction, if you are a buyer side and you have a transaction that is going to fall out, don't cancel it without calling Tommy or I so we can help you learn how to assign those transactions out. Okay, you do not have to cancel. You have a lawful contract that's sellable. So if your appraisal fails to come in and that buyer's not going to work, let us show you how to get 2 escrows out of it. Put the first one into a property where he's happy and hang on to the contract you have with the one you have right now.
Absolutely. And that is one of our Zoom and learns that you could go back and watch as well.
Assignments, yep.
Assignments. All right, guys. So thank you so much. We are right at that 1 hour mark. So we try and keep these Zoom and learns to an hour wherever possible. We thank everybody for your time and we look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you, Mary Jane and Tommy. Appreciate it. Thank you, all of our guests.
Tracy, you're going to get back to me